yes, let's talk about energy prices because we know they're going up June 1st with PPL, 15%. So as a consumer, what is that going to look like for people who use PPL?
I think it's going to become very difficult for people who use PP&L. But this is part of a broader issue, and that issue is that Pennsylvania and Southern York County in particular, we are constantly under siege because other states are not being responsible. Other states are closing down baseload energy generation, which makes them relied on Pennsylvania, Southern York County, to get their energy. At the same time they're closing down reliable baseload energy, they are citing high demand energy projects like AI data centers. And you look to the south, just south of the Mason-Dixon line, which is about 10 miles from my district office where we are sitting now. And we are constantly seeing additional transmission line projects to bring power generated in Pennsylvania down to Maryland who have failed energy policies and they can't generate enough power for their citizens. And so the crazy thing is that we have learned in our Consumer Protection Committee that not only are we generating the power and bear the burden of generating that power, we also bear the burden of eminent domain taking our land to build these high voltage power transmission line projects. But here's the real kicker. We also pay for that infrastructure in Pennsylvania to get that energy to a place where people are refusing to do the right thing. Now, I don't know if you watched this, but just this week, Consumer Protection Committee, along with the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, held a hearing. And we heard from PJM, and we heard from energy producers. We heard from the chairman of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. PJM has issued a warning about brownouts and blackouts. Mm-hmm. And they have said to states, be very careful. Don't put policies in place to take energy production offline because we need every last bit of the energy in the PJM grid to avoid these kinds of problems.
So how is it legal, if I'm watching this as a consumer, I'm like, how is it legal that these plants can be built with taxpayer money in Pennsylvania and then other states are benefiting from that instead of Pennsylvanians?
So we're part of a grid and energy flows throughout the entire grid. But what I have continued to say is at some point we're going to have to put Pennsylvanians first. And words are great, but actions speak louder than words. If Pennsylvania shut off power to New Jersey, to Maryland, to Northern Virginia, they would be in a world of hurt.
So what does that look like? What action items can we take or can lawmakers take to ensure that Pennsylvanians are being served first?
Well, we have to make sure that our consumers, our ratepayers here in this Commonwealth are not on the hook to build transmission lines where their land is taken and then consumers have to pay through their electric bills for the infrastructure to transmit it to other states. Those consumers in other states, they need to be on the hook for the cost of getting the power to their homes, to their businesses, because quite honestly, we look around at places like New Jersey and Maryland, they're living in a green energy fantasy land. They want to feel really good about how green they are, when in reality, all they are doing is relying on Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania consumers for the cost of the infrastructure and the power that they need to be able, for their people, to turn on the lights.
Are there any steps that can be taken from here over the next few weeks?
I think the quickest way to address this is for the governor to stand up and talk with governors in other states and say, hey, you know what PJM has said. You have to start taking responsibility for the needs of your citizens. And that could happen immediately without any action needing to be taken by legislatures or even PJM. You know, I have said this before, I will say it again. We are part of a grid. Being part of a grid comes with rights, but being part of a grid also comes with responsibilities, and some of that responsibility is for rational, sane energy policy that meets the needs of the citizens of your state. PJM has said, don't take baseload energy generation off the grid. We can't afford it, or there are going to be power surges and brownouts.
It seems like the demand for power, especially with these AI data centers, for example, as you're talking about the brown and blackouts, it seems like these power centers or the data centers are taking a lot of that energy. Is there a way to create more energy here in Pennsylvania as we battle with these other states when it comes to them shutting down plants?
Well, I think a great example of what we can do in Pennsylvania is what they've done out in Homer City. You see that they've taken an old coal power plant and they have transformed it. And it's not only going to have enough energy to meet its own needs, it's going to have energy that it's going to put back into the grid. That's responsible redevelopment of a brownfield old power site. That's a good thing. We need to see more of that. But I think, you know, it's really comes down to a simple mathematical equation. States like Maryland, states like New Jersey have to say, this is how much power we consume. And they can't continue to shut down baseload generation to make themselves feel good about being green and then say, okay, Pennsylvania, you need to generate more.
With what you just mentioned, I'm not as familiar with that. Is that a coal mine that would be reopened and then
it's an old coal-fired plant out in, I think it's actually in Senator Joe Pittman's district.
Okay.
Yes.
Indiana County.
What, do you have anything, Tyler?
Is it feasible, and maybe this is just a pie in the sky hypothetical, is it actually feasible for Pennsylvania to do it ourselves? Use our own energy, be on our own grid, a la Texas, for example.
Well, I think...
And leave PJM.
I think anything is possible. Is it probable? I don't know. But I think what can happen tomorrow, what can happen immediately, is for elected officials to stand up and say to states like Maryland and states like New Jersey, something is going to give. And if it does, it is the direct result of your failed energy policies, and it's time that you step up.
Have you spoken to the lawmakers in Maryland? What did they say when you tried to talk to them?
I actually have spoken to several lawmakers in Maryland. Those lawmakers immediately over the Mason-Dixon line, those are people that I've worked with. A lot of issues don't respect political boundaries. So when there have been the opportunity to work for the betterment of people along the Mason-Dixon line, on both sides of it, I have always seized that opportunity and worked with them. And those people in northern Hartford, northern Baltimore, northern Carroll County, they are as aggrieved as we are because they feel the same kind of pressures and burdens that we have felt, because to get those high voltage power transmission lines carrying the energy that's needed for major population centers, it goes through their land too.
Sorry,
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say devil's advocate for the clean energy side. You know, what would you say to people who are saying clean energy is good, we need to be moving in this direction when it comes to making our world more green and cleaner?
Look, I would say just look at the numbers. You can go on to PJM and you can see exactly where we were 10 years ago. In 2013, we had a significantly smaller amount of natural gas energy generation. 2023, it's grown exponentially. Less than 5% of our grid is currently being powered by coal out of Pennsylvania. So we've seen a decline in coal generation and significant increase in natural gas generation, and renewables have stayed about the same at around 4%. But what's been really interesting to look at is we've also, over those 10 years seen a decrease in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So we are generating more and more power, and we are reducing the amount of carbon that we've put into our atmosphere. And the numbers are all there on the PJM grid. And you can also go on and you can look at an hourly generation map, and you will see the challenge that Pennsylvania faces. And you look at the deficit of generation in places like New Jersey, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and you can look at the huge amount of energy in excess of what Pennsylvania citizens need, Pennsylvania generates. And again, it comes down to simple math. They're just not pulling their fair share in this grid.
If nothing happens, what does that mean for us? I know that we have this price increase June 15th with PPL, 15%. That can be a lot for some households. So what happens if the governor doesn't act, if we don't open this, the coal mine that you mentioned?
Look, I've said this before, I will say it again. Something is going to give. We heard from PJM this week, the grid will not be able to sustain the amount of demand that it is facing if other states don't step up and do the right thing.
Where do you see, you have Peach Bottom in your,
I have
in your
Peach
district,
Bottom,
right?
I have Peach Bottom Atomic Power Plant, I have 2 Calpine natural gas plants, I have 2 hydroelectric facilities along the river, I have a myriad of solar, I have some wind, and right up the river on the other side of my district is Bruner Island, which is a coal plant that's going to be transitioned to natural gas. We generate a huge amount of power right here in York County to the benefit of Pennsylvanians, but even more to the benefit of Marylanders.
Do you see more? Would you be open to maybe more nuclear as of in the future? More plants like Peach Bottom, for example. We know, Constellation's getting ready to reopen the Crane Clean Energy Center. I think they're looking at another nuclear plant further up the Susquehanna River. Do you see more nuclear plants as a potential solution? Or?
Look, I think when you look across the PJM grid, it's an all-of-the-above approach. It has to be reliable baseload generation. Wind, that's great. Solar, that's great. It's not reliable. PJM rates energy projects based on their reliability, and wind and solar rank somewhere between 4 and 14%. You can't rely on that when the sun is not shining. You can't rely on that when the wind isn't blowing just right, because if it's too windy, wind energy doesn't work. If it's not windy at all, wind energy doesn't work. So we need reliable baseload energy generation. We need to protect our grid. And again, it is the failed energy policies of other states that have put this grid into the perilous position that it's in.
Is nuclear energy reliable, would you say?
Well, nuclear energy is very reliable. You turn it on and it goes.
Yeah, so with the Constellation Energy, as Tyler was talking about, that might help, but that's not till 2028 when they're supposed to get geared up again, and that's with
That
Microsoft.
energy's being bought by Microsoft.
Right.
You've been very outspoken against the Cuffs Run project,
Extremely outspoken.
which they argue would help with the energy crisis as well. But you're saying that at what cost, right?
Well, exactly. So let's talk about that project. That project would take 1,000 acres of land, people's homes, people's farms, people's businesses. They would create 2 reservoirs that would be separated by a dam structure that would exceed the dimensions of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Think about that. Then they would pull water from the Susquehanna River into the upper reservoir when energy is inexpensive, probably at night. And then when peak demand hits and those data centers are churning down in Northern Virginia and Maryland, during the day, they're going to release that energy, and they're going to lose 15% of the energy in the process, but they're going to make money because energy is more expensive during peak demand. Mm-hmm. So essentially, it is a 1,000-acre battery backup for people in other states who aren't doing the right thing at great expense to people here in York County, at great expense to our natural resources, to our historical resources. It's not acceptable. And one thing that really hasn't even been discussed is that battery, that 1,000-acre battery, is going to have to be tied into the grid by high voltage power transmission lines. No one's really talked about the fact that those high voltage power transmission lines, the way the project has been conceived, are to go right along the banks of the Susquehanna River down into Maryland.
Kind of destroys the beauty of the Susquehanna there, doesn't it?
Well, it's a river that a lot of people have worked really hard on to not only preserve but improve the quality of water and improve the resources of that river. I don't think that's something we should be compromising on.
Trying to think.
What's made you so passionate about this? Because I can tell it's something that you really care about. Is it people in your community coming forward? Is it as you've learned about it? What is it that really...
You know, when you become a legislator, you think that you know what you're going to Harrisburg to do, right? If you had asked me when I was first elected, I was going to Harrisburg to reduce taxes and to get rid of unnecessary regulations. I'm still passionate about those issues, but when the TransSource project happened in my district, it was such an ill-conceived project. We had existing capacity on existing high voltage power transmission lines, and they were proposing to take people's land, erect more of these iron giants, and some people's farms were going to be crisscrossed by these monstrosities. And it just didn't seem responsible. And people were not treated well. And I think government taking people's property is egregious. You really have to meet a very high standard to take someone's home, their farm, their business, their livelihoods out from under them. And to see this happen, not once, but multiple times in Southern York County, you have to stand up. I was elected to stand up for the people that I represent, and that's exactly what I'm doing.